para a gente algumas coisas bacanas que a gente tem aí dessas ações conjuntas do Círculo com a Casa do Povo, né? Então, Su, contigo.
Obrigada, Ali. Seguinte, gente, é um aviso rápido, mas bem legal. No próximo círculo, a gente vai estar fazendo uma ação junto com a 451, né, por meio da Casa do Povo. Então, vai ter a nova edição do Nossa Voz, que vai ser lançada em maio, e junto com isso, né, vem a nova edição também da 451, e vai ter uma ação de distribuição das duas revistas em conjunto, no mês que vem. E quem se inscrever no Círculo de Reflexão de maio, recebe em casa ambas as revistas, tá? Então, é só aquele formuláriozinho que vocês já recebem mensalmente via newsletter, só coloquem o nome de vocês lá e a gente vai pedir, enfim, todos os dados necessários, mas vocês vão receber as duas edições em casa, tá? Tem, inclusive, um especial sobre literatura israelense e eu acho que vai ser do gosto de vocês, tá bom? É só esse aviso, eu passo agora a palavra para o Benjamin.
Su, só para lembrar que gente que não recebe a nossa comunicação, sempre vale a pena deixar o e-mail aqui no chat, porque às vezes a gente tem pessoas que estão vindo no Círculo pela primeira vez, então se vocês estiverem interessados em entrar no newsletter, deixem aí o e-mail de vocês para a gente acrescentar.
Perfeito, é só deixarem no chat, tá? E só mais um aviso que eu esqueci de comentar, esse formulário vai estar rodando através de outras redes da Casa do Povo também, mas deixem o e-mail de vocês para a gente colocar no nosso mailing também, do Círculo. Benjamin.
Então, bom dia a todas e a todos. Muito bom estar aqui. E muito bonito de ver que, enfim, o último encontro, o próximo, a gente consegue estar mais próximo, a Casa do Povo e o Círculo. Ou seja, apesar da pandemia, a gente acaba criando mais conteúdos juntos. Eu acho que isso é muito legal, porque, de fato, a gente está aqui criando conhecimento, conversando, se encontrando, e fazer isso tentando entrelaçar mais a programação da casa e a programação do Círculo tem sido muito gostoso. E o último encontro que foi feito junto com o grupo Yiddish também trouxe algumas conversas sobre a remontagem da peça A Goldfaden Holem, o sonho de Goldfaden, com a Marta Kiss, o Juliano Abramovay, e alguns músicos e atores que participam dessa remontagem, com o Gueto Sendat, que está aqui. E, de uma certa maneira, esse encontro a gente pensou ali juntos, já que essa peça está para chegar, a gente terminou uma boa parte dos ensaios, das gravações, porque ela vai ser gravada, e ela está para chegar, a gente resolveu, junto com o Círculo, poder discutir um pouco alguns temas paralelos que cruzam esse universo que vem junto à peça, que é a Polônia judaica, que é esse Yiddishland polonesa, que também extrapolava os limites da Polônia. Porque o Jakub Rodbaum, que escreveu essa peça, vem da Polônia, veio da Polônia e fez essa montagem no Brasil, e a gente conseguiu, acho interessante, sempre contar dos bastidores, montar essa peça, essa remontagem do Sonho de Goldfaden, com apoios no Brasil, né, mas com apoios também na Polônia. A gente contou no início com um pontapé dado graças a Dorota Quinta, do Instituto Adam Mickiewicz, na época, que ajudou a encontrar, inclusive, partituras e texto original. E a gente conseguiu um apoio no Brasil, é muito interessante, da Casa Sanguszko, que é uma casa polonesa de cultura paulistana. E então é muito interessante ver que essa remontagem é feita juntando o esforço da comunidade judaica, da comunidade polonesa e desse espaço entre judaico-polonês. E por isso, talvez, que a gente pensou que era interessante trazer, de fato, alguém que está atuando ali diretamente em Cracóvia, na Polônia, para poder trazer reflexões sobre culturas que muitas vezes a gente essencializa e separa, achando que os adjetivos judaico-poloneses dão conta de uma realidade, sendo que, na verdade, as coisas são entrosadas, né? E que o drama da Shoah talvez justamente foi de arrancar a carne da carne, culturas que estavam juntos há tantos anos. Mas eu não quero me alongar mais, eu estou muito ansioso para voltar ao meu lugar de ouvinte do Círculo, mas eu quero muito agradecer ao Círculo, ao Jonathan. Como vocês sabem, a casa ela tem essa dinâmica de hóspede-anfitrião. Então, a casa é a anfitriã do Círculo, mas hoje o Círculo, que é o anfitrião desse encontro, e a casa é apenas convidado. Então, Lilian, eu te devolvo a palavra, eu agradeço demais, e obrigado, Suzana, pelo informe do mês que vem e por mais essa parceria com a 451, com a literatura israelense e com o Círculo, para continuar aí entrosando pensamentos, ideias, e de fato a Lilian mostrou o jornal Nossa Voz, está lindo, saiu da gráfica agora mesmo, espero que ele está chegando nas casas de vocês, mas para quem ainda não tem, ele vai chegar com a 451, se vocês participam desse encontro mês que vem. Então, um grande abraço, eu vou ficar ali na retaguarda. Uma coisa importante, a questão técnica, talvez a coisa mais importante. Todos vocês conseguem ver no rodapé, embaixo, onde tem um microfone, que vocês podem ativar ou desativar, a câmera, vocês têm um globo escrito interpretação. Todo mundo consegue, se alguém não consegue ver esse globo interpretação, escrevem no chat, ou levantam a mão, fazem alguma reação, porque isso é fundamental. Esse globinho, ele serve para você escolher o seu canal, porque o Jonathan é um polonês nova-iorquino, então ele vai falar ou nova-iorquino polonês, ele vai falar em inglês. Então vocês podem escolher aí a bolinha para ouvir ele em português, graças ao trabalho maravilhoso do Cleiton e da Daniela, que são os bastidores, e que vão traduzir ele. Então, vocês veem, tem reações, onde vocês podem mandar joinha, e tem um globo, escrito interpretação. Isso para quem está no computador. Se vocês estão no celular, eu não sei bem como está, mas deve ser uma coisa bem autoexplicativa. E daí vocês escolhem interpretação e escolhem português, que daí vocês vão ouvir tudo em português. Quando eu falo português, como eu estou aqui em francês, vocês vão continuar ouvindo meu português, está aqui em francês. Mas quando o Jonathan fala inglês, vocês vão ouvir ele em português, certo? Então é só escolher o canal, desligado, inglês e português. Quem não fala inglês, selecione português. Pronto. Acho que do lado da Norma está funcionando. Norma, vou desligar o seu microfone, eu repasso para a Lilian.
Eu queria passar um pouco.
Ok.
Todo mundo tem. Quem tem iPhone? É só adulto?
Bom, gente, eu vou lembrar a todos de tentarem aí checar que estão com seus microfones fechados. Vou pedir para quem estiver em movimento, fazer a gentileza de fechar sua câmera, porque para quem está assistindo é desconfortável ver as pessoas em trânsito, ou caminhando, ou dentro do carro. Então, para a gente poder se concentrar na fala do Jonathan, tá? Queria agradecer, Benjamin, prazer. Acho que a gente tem, enfim, essa alegria de tempos em tempos poder estar com projetos que estão conversando mais e sempre muito rico, né? A gente também poder participar de outras conversas e outras produções que também estão acontecendo na casa. E queria dar parabéns pela Nossa Voz que eu recebi essa semana. E realmente está lindo, a edição ficou super bonita, estou bem instigada já para ir continuando a minha leitura, muito feliz de receber aqui também. Então, nesse sentido, eu vou passar a palavra para o Jonathan. Normalmente a gente faz essa apresentação, nosso convidado costuma ter aí, né, a sua apresentação dos seus 40, 50 minutos de fala, e depois a gente abre para comentários e perguntas. E, de qualquer maneira, estou entendendo que esse modelo de tradução também vai servir para os momentos que a gente queira fazer perguntas. Então, assim como eu estou à vontade aqui de falar português, quem quiser fazer as suas colocações, suas perguntas em português, também fique à vontade na hora que a gente abrir as questões. Tá bom? Jonathan, é com você. Por favor, fique à vontade para se apresentar e para fazer a sua fala.
Okay. Thank you. Obrigada. Bom dia. Bom estar com todos vocês. I know I'm ruining the translation if I speak in Portuguese, then the system blows up. But no, it's very, very nice to be here with you today. I wish, especially because I'm in Poland and it snowed yesterday, I can say certainly that I really wish I was there with you in person. I want to thank Benjamin and Lillian, and also the translation, Clayton and Daniela, for this wonderful opportunity that I can speak in English and you can hear me in Portuguese. The first time I've done the translation on Zoom, so very exciting. Shabbat Shalom to everybody. I appreciate that we're able to do this on Shabbat, which if you hear, and I think you won't hear, but I'm here with my dog. So if you hear a dog barking or something strange going on, it's my dog, not me. My name is Jonathan, again. I am the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Center in Krakow. I'm originally from New York City. I made Aliyah. I became a new immigrant to Israel. I lived for 7 years in Israel on a kibbutz, in the desert, in the south of Israel, near Eilat. And then I met a Polish woman who was a volunteer on my kibbutz, and I left Israel and moved to Poland. I'd never been here to visit. I just took my suitcase and moved to Poland. I lived first for 1 year in a different city, in a city called Lodz for Jews, which was a very Jewish city before World War II. And then I got a job in Krakow. So I moved to Krakow in 2002, and I've been living in Krakow for 19 years. So I've become a Polish citizen. I'm married to a Polish Jewish woman, and this is my story. I want to begin my presentation to you with telling you a story, which I think illustrates. First of all, the translation is working okay? Yeah, everybody, okay. Good, thank you. I hope I'm not speaking too fast. You know, I'm a New Yorker, we speak very, very fast. So I'm trying to speak at reasonable speed. So I'll start with a story that I think illustrates what's happening today in Jewish Poland. A young woman a couple of years ago walked into the JCC, into our building, which is in the Jewish quarter of Krakow, which is the best preserved Jewish quarter in Europe. Many old synagogues and buildings, very, very beautiful, very old. She asked to speak to a rabbi. There was no rabbi in our building at that moment, so she came to my office and sat down. She looked very, very nervous. I tried to calm her down, and it's okay. You know, you can be relaxed. Brought her a glass of water, and I said, "How can I help you? Why are you here?" She begins to tell me a story, which is the following. She tells me that a few days earlier, her grandmother, who was in her 80s, called her to come over. She said, "Grandma, are you okay? Is everything okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. Just come right over." So she's a good granddaughter. She went right over to her grandmother's house. Everything, "What's going on, Grandma? Why did you call me?" "Please have a seat," she says to her granddaughter. Granddaughter sits down on the edge of her bed, and she says, "I have to tell you a story. I'm Jewish, you're Jewish." This is the first thing that this girl ever heard about being Jewish, never even thought about the word Jewish in her life. The grandmother tells her, "I was a little girl during the war. We were Jews, so we were in the ghetto. And one night, with no warning, my parents dressed me and brought me to the edge of the ghetto. They handed me over to a stranger, told me to go with him. And the last thing that they told me was never tell anyone that you're Jewish. The stranger brought her out of the ghetto, that handed her over to a couple, brought them to the house of this young couple. This couple raised the girl to a woman. She got married, had children, now grandchildren, had a career, and she kept this promise to her parents, to her murdered parents. That was the last time she ever saw her parents, was in the ghetto, and she kept her promise. She never told anyone that she was Jewish until that very moment, a few days earlier, when she was sitting across from her granddaughter, who was, I think, maybe 22, 21, named Maria, and told her, "You're Jewish, go find out what that means." So Maria came into our JCC, into our, Centro Hebraico, Jewish Community Center, and told me this story. And it's an amazing story, but I was trying to look calm, not because she was very nervous. I didn't want her to be nervous. So I said, "Oh, that's a very nice story. Okay." There are so many people who come in here and tell me stories just like you, which is not really true. I don't hear stories like that every day because I think my heart wouldn't take a story like that every day. And she said, "What should I do?" I said, "Well, we have a Friday night dinner, a Shabbat dinner every week at the JCC." She said, "What's Shabbat?" I explained to her that for Jews, it's Saturday and not Sunday, and she should come Friday night, we begin. She should come for a Shabbat, a meal, and she can meet some other people her age that have similar experiences. So she came that week, and she started to talk to people and realized she wasn't the only person going through this strange sense of awakening. And she since has become very involved. She now sees herself as Jewish. She has been to Israel on a program, Birthright, a program to bring young Jews to Israel. And she is a full member of Krakow's Jewish community. And this is not happening only she's not the only example. My wife, I said I was married to somebody who's Polish. My wife also found out that she was Jewish. She grew up, she found out also in her 20s. It wasn't as dramatic as this story, but she also found out, and we met at the JCC, at the Jewish Community Center. I met my wife. But so just to be clear, the woman that I met in Israel was not my wife now. I came to Poland for one woman, and we broke up, and then I married my wife. So this is why before I started, they said, "Why did you come to Poland and why did you stay?" And I came to Poland because of a woman, and I stayed because of a woman. It's just that it's different women. So there you go. But I think what's interesting is that this is happening in great numbers. Young people finding out that they're Jewish. Now, how do we get to this point in the year 2021 with young people like my wife, like Maria, finding out in these all different ways that they're Jewish? Sometimes it's a dramatic way, like Maria's story. Sometimes I know somebody who was Googling themselves, checking themselves on Google. Some of us do it maybe a little too much. Some of us don't do it too often. But she was a girl, 15-year-old girl, Googling her family, and she sees that her grandparents changed the name, right? She sees her family tree and she sees that the name changed. And she calls into her mother, and her mother is in the other room, and she says, "Mom, I'm on, I found our family tree. I see that the name changed. It seems German to me. Are we German? What's going on?" And her mother goes, No, we're Jewish. What, you didn't know? So, you know, in all types of strange ways, people finding out they're Jewish. But what I want to do now is to try to understand how we get to this moment in 2021 of people finding out they're Jewish. So I'm certain that you know that Poland was a very, very Jewish place before the war. I think we sometimes don't always realize how Jewish it was. In the 18th century, at a certain moment, 75% of the Jews in the world were living in Poland. Now, it's not exactly Poland according to today's borders. Poland moved after the war and the borders shifted in Europe many times, but Greater Poland, at its largest, contained 3 out of every 4 Jews on the planet. This is a little bit like the United States and Israel together, was what Poland was to the Jewish people. By 1939, on the edge, and Jews have been living in Poland for 1,000 years. Constant Jewish presence, 1,000 years. By 1939, by the beginning of World War II, Poland had 3.5 million Jews. This was 10% of the population. Sometimes we think of Polish Jews in the sense like Fiddler on the Roof. This wasn't exactly Poland, but with this idea of Jews only living in these small villages, which we call in Yiddish, we say shtetl, right? But in these small villages, but it's not the case. Jews were living in small villages, but Jews were also living in the cities. Warsaw, the capital of Poland, was 1/3 Jewish. Krakow, where I live, beautiful Krakow, was 25% Jewish before the war. There are no cities today anywhere on earth as Jewish as these cities in Poland were before the war, outside of Israel, of course. The middle class in Poland, very, very Jewish, right? It wasn't only these Jews separate living on their own in the villages. The middle class of Poland was Jewish. 60% of the lawyers and 40% of the doctors in Poland were Jewish in 1939. On September 1st, Germany invades from one side. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invades from the other side. During the 5.5 years of occupation, the Germans and their accomplices perpetrate the Holocaust. 6 million European Jews are murdered. Over 3 million, over half of the Jews murdered in the Holocaust were Polish Jews. 3.1 million Jews out of 3.5 million were murdered, over 90%. We understand there were survivors, right? We know that there were Polish Jews, some Polish Jews survived the war. We know they went to Brazil, to the United States, to Israel, to anywhere in Europe that they could go, any country that would take them, Cuba. These survivors went anywhere that they could go. And for us as Jews living around the world, this is usually the end of the Polish story, right? There are Jews living in Poland for many years, 1,000 years. We have the Holocaust, Jews are murdered, and then the survivors leave and pick up their lives all around the world. But what we sometimes don't always think about, what we don't always realize, is that some Jews stayed in Poland. Not all the Jews left. Now, I'm not going to get exactly into the reasons that Jews stayed in Poland. Some were true believers in communism. Some were children that had no families left. They were hidden and their families were murdered during the Holocaust. Maybe they had older relatives that pretended not to be Jewish and they survived. All different complicated reasons, but not all the Jews who survived left. So Jews stayed in Poland after the Holocaust. Now it was a small percentage, but when you're starting out with 3.5 million, right? Even 10% of 3.5 million is still 350,000. Still a lot of Jews. So we have Jews living in Poland after the war. And as we know, after the war, Poland was not a free country. Poland was a communist country. Poland was controlled by the Soviet Union. And during this period, there were ups and downs for the Jews. Sometimes it was a little easier to be Jewish. Sometimes it was a little more difficult to be Jewish. Depends on what the mood was in the Soviet Union. And then at a certain point, it got very, very bad for the Jews again in Poland. Now, it didn't get as bad as the Holocaust, but there was an official wave of anti-Semitism in 1968. Why 1968? Because 1968 is after 1967. Don't worry, I'm not going to say 1967 is after 1966 and go back 2,000 years. But 1967 for us is important because this is the Six-Day War, right? This is the war between Israel and the Arab states that the Soviet Union, which meant all the countries controlled by the Soviet Union, supported the Arab states. And they weren't very happy with the result. This is one reason. And the second reason things got difficult for Jews in 1968 was because there were lots of uprisings student revolts, student uprisings going on in Europe. And some of those people leading the uprisings in Poland were Jewish. Jews are usually involved in many things, but it wasn't only Jews. But of course, the government used these two things as an excuse. And they said, there are people in Poland who aren't loyal citizens, who aren't loyal members of the society, and they need to leave. And they didn't say the word Jews, they said the word Zionists. But what did they mean? They meant Jews, right? They said people here aren't loyal, those people can leave. So the Jews got a passport, a one-way passport, or they didn't even have a passport, they had a travel document, and their passports were taken, and they were encouraged to leave Poland. And this is what many of the Jews did in 1968. I say many, but not all the Jews. Jews are stubborn people. We're stubborn from New York. Polish Jews are stubborn. I'm going to guess Brazilian Jews also stubborn. We're stubborn everywhere. Certainly some of those Jews in 1968, for again, all different reasons, not all of them left Poland. But what did the Jews do who stayed in Poland after 68? They went underground, right? They became, like we say in Hebrew, anusim, Moranos, in the sense of the Jews who left Spain, right? They hid their identities. Jews in 1968 in Poland changed their names. They didn't tell anybody that they were Jewish. Synagogues, everything stopped. All the Jewish communal life, cultural life stopped. And if you were a Polish Jew staying in Poland, it probably meant you were staying in Poland because you were married to somebody not Jewish, right? Because Jews lost their jobs, right? Or one day you were a doctor in a hospital, and then 1968, they said, okay, now you're the cleaner. You're going to clean in the hospital instead of being a doctor. So the Jews who stayed very often had a non-Jewish partner. And that's what kept them, one of the things that kept them in Poland. And those couples who had children very, very often didn't tell their children that those children were Jewish, right? If you stayed in Poland and there was anti-Semitism, again, why would you tell your children that they were Jewish so then they would feel all the time this anti-Semitism? You protected your children by not telling them that they were Jewish. So in the 1970s and the 1980s, there was almost no Jewish life going on in Poland. But if you think about it, it's a little bit like if you went to Spain or Portugal in the 16th century, right? Even the beginning of the 16th century, and you said, oh, how many Jews are in Portugal? Or how many Jews are in Spain? I think officially the number was 0. But of course, if you walk down the street, he's Jewish, she's Jewish, he's Jewish, she's Jewish, many people. So this was the situation going on in Poland from 1968 to 1989. In 1989, the world changes, the Iron Curtain falls in Europe. Suddenly, for the first time in 50 years, Poland is a free country. From 1939 to 1989, Poland wasn't free. It was almost like World War II in Poland lasted 50 years. Of course, officially the war was only 6 years, but from 1945 to 1989, Poland was occupied by the Soviet Union, which meant that Poland wasn't free to learn about its own history. It wasn't free to discuss many difficult issues, including the Holocaust and what happened to the Jews. These were things that nobody really spoke about during communism. It wasn't convenient for the Soviet Union to allow those types of things to be discussed. So in 1989, Poland is free for the first time, and something very interesting happens. One of the first things that Polish non-Jews look at the country. They see that they're living in a country that is free for the first time in 50 years. And they see that one of the big changes from 1939, the last time the country was free, to 1989, is that there are no Jews, right? There are no Jews in Poland. They think there are no Jews in Poland in 1989 because all the Jews have either been murdered, kicked out of Poland, or the ones who stayed went underground. So Polish Jewish, non-Jewish relations in Poland or in any country, it's like a dialogue. And this dialogue had been going on in Poland for 1,000 years. And it was cut off in 1939 because of the World War II and the Holocaust. And it didn't continue during communism. Everything was frozen during communism. And then in 1989, this dialogue can't be continued between Jews and non-Jews. Again, because the Jews were either murdered, driven out of the country, or pushed underground. So non-Jews start to become very interested in everything Jewish, and they can't discuss it with their Jewish neighbors because there are no Jewish neighbors. So the non-Jews start to listen to Jewish music, and they start to write books, and they start to do research, and they start museums about Jews, and they start, klezmer music becomes very popular in Poland after 1989, and they start Jewish culture festivals, including the Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow, Poland, which is, I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the Jewish festival, Culture Festival in Krakow, Poland, but it's the largest Jewish culture festival in the world and started by two non-Jews right at the end of communism and still going now every year. Now, Corona, of course, taking a break in person, but in its 32nd, 33rd year, run still by one of the non-Jewish founders of the Jewish Culture Festival. So what kind of crazy world, especially as a New Yorker, that the largest Jewish culture festival is in Poland, in Krakow, run by a non-Jew. But this really speaks to the interest, the fascination with everything Jewish in a country that used to be so Jewish and then never was able, until 1989, never was able to deal with these issues that 10% of the population was murdered. So since 1989, there's a tremendous amount of interest in everything Jewish. In 1993, a few years after communism ends, Steven Spielberg comes to Poland and he films a very famous film in Krakow, Schindler's List. And this leads to a lot of development and really the revitalization of the Jewish quarter, where I'm sitting right now. I mentioned earlier, it's the best preserved Jewish quarter anywhere. in Europe. We have 7 pre-war synagogues. I'm looking out my window at one of them. So I'm looking out at the window at a synagogue from the 17th century, which is literally 3 meters away from my door where I'm sitting now. These 7 synagogues, the youngest, the baby of Krakow synagogues, is from 1862, and the oldest is from the 15th century. You can walk to all 7 of them in 10 minutes on foot. So you have an intact Jewish quarter, you have the largest Jewish culture festival in the world, and you have a population of non-Jews that are absolutely fascinated by everything Jewish. And this is the environment that leads to the story that I told you in the beginning. The story that I told you in the beginning about this young girl who's Polish, who found out that she's Jewish, that didn't know. So since 1989, 2 things are happening. One, I told you now, there's a tremendous amount of interest in all things Jewish among Poles. And this has created an environment that allows the second thing to happen. The second thing is dozens and hundreds and thousands of Poles are finding out that they have Jewish roots. Their parents and grandparents that were afraid to tell them during communism now see that Poland has changed. They see not only is Poland a democratic country, more or less these days, it's a separate issue, but Poland is certainly compared to communism, a democratic country, and they see all this non-Jewish interest in everything Jewish, and it helps them, not only these young people find out that they're Jewish, but they see that it's a safe environment. In other words, you can find out that you're Jewish, or you can find out you have a Jewish parent or a Jewish grandparent, and you can smile to yourself and say, so what? And continue to live your life as a Pole. Catholic Pole, very Catholic Pole, doesn't matter. But you don't have to act on it. But because there's an interesting environment here, of Poles that are so interested in everything Jewish, that these young people finding out they're Jewish are now choosing, they're making a choice that they don't have to make. They're making a choice to get involved and to rejoin the Jewish community. So this is the environment that my JCC, where I'm the director, exists. Our JCC was founded a few years later in 2008. So this is our bar mitzvah year, but we're going to celebrate our bar mitzvah year, our 13th birthday next year, because it's no fun to celebrate in 2021. So we'll wait a year and celebrate our 13th birthday in 2022. Our center was founded by Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, who visited our community. He wanted to help the survivors, and that turned into a larger project of building a Jewish community center. Our center is many things that are going on in our building. And again, not during Corona, not so much at all is going on, but in the normal situation, many things are going on. We started a preschool, a kindergarten, which is the first Jewish community kindergarten, community preschool since the Holocaust. We have student programs, we have Shabbat dinners, we have visitors, 130,000 visitors came to our building in 2019. And we are rebuilding Jewish life in our city. Something very interesting, and I saw through the chat that there was a question about, oh, they like our culture, do they like us? This is always a complicated question, of course. I can tell you that our center, which is a small center, has 70 non-Jewish volunteers, 70 non-Jewish volunteers. When you walk into our building in the reception, there's not a paid worker, it's a young Polish non-Jew. If you come for Shabbat dinner to our JCC, it's the people who are bringing you food and taking the food are not paid. They are young, non-Jewish Poles, Polish students mostly, who believe that the country lost something, that the heart was ripped out of Poland when the Jews were murdered and kicked out of the country, and they want to help us rebuild Jewish life. For the first 9.5 years, until we opened the preschool, we opened the preschool 3 years ago, until we opened our preschool, our building had no security. The gate was wide open, the front door was wide open. It says on our building still, in very, very big orange letters, Jewish Community Center. We're not hiding. We're not afraid of the local community. We've had no anti-Semitic issues. Nobody's bothered us. We don't feel any threat. And we've been open for 13 years. So we feel very integrated into the local community. We have non-Jews and Jews working in our building. We have non-Jews and Jews using our building. We are focused on rebuilding Jewish life, but we're also focused on educating local non-Jews about the Jewish world. So we have 200 people, normally even more now during Corona, studying Hebrew, and they study Yiddish. We have Arabic classes. Most things are open to anybody. So we have Jews and non-Jews together learning about Jewish culture. There are also some things that are only, to be honest, only for Jews. We have many Holocaust survivors. In our community, we have 50 Holocaust survivors that we are the ones taking care of those survivors. They're in our building, not during Corona, 6 days a week until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and we are the ones taking care of them. So it's really a very positive situation. And I should mention, if you're not aware of the geography, that we are about 90 kilometers, so 1 hour's drive in a car from Auschwitz, from the center of the Holocaust. There's, I think, a remarkable rebirth of Jewish life going on in a place that many of us think of as the center of Jewish death. And I think this has importance for our community, of course. Our community were able to reach out to these Jews, these people who are lost to the Jewish world, right? We always say that we can't go back and save the Jews from the Holocaust, right? The Jews that were murdered in the Holocaust were murdered in the Holocaust. But we do have an opportunity, we have a chance to go out and to reach out to these Jews who weren't killed in the Holocaust, but they were driven away from Judaism. They were cut off from the Jewish world because of the Holocaust and because of communism. And now we can actually bring them back to these lost Jews, bring them back to the Jewish people. So it's important for us, but I think it's important for the entire Jewish world. The idea at a time when we have so much anti-Semitism all around the world, in the United States, synagogues being attacked over the last few years, the idea of Jewish life thriving once again in Poland, I think, is a very powerful symbol to our enemies, to those who will want to do us harm, that Jewish life is so strong. We're so strong as a people that we can thrive even in a place where the Holocaust happened. And it also reminds us, it reminds ourselves, the Jewish people, that we are so strong that we have to not worry all the time about anti-Semitism. We need to understand that we are such a strong, resilient people that we're able to thrive anywhere, not only in Sao Paulo and New York and Tel Aviv, but even in Krakow, down the road from Auschwitz. So this was generally the story that I wanted to tell you. Thank you. Obrigada. If you have questions, I'm happy. I saw questions in the chat, but they were popping up.
A gente vai abrir aqui.
Lilian, só um cuidado, que as perguntas é muito importante que sejam feitas em português. Você não vai embaralhar o jogo, porque os canais estão bem separadinhos. Então, mesmo quem fala inglês, faz um esforço para perguntar em português. E se não está claro, escreve em inglês no chat, mas senão vai embaralhar o jogo, as pessoas que não falam não vão ouvir, então é só para pedir esse cuidado.
Muito bem, então, a gente vai abrir. Queria começar agradecendo muito a tua fala, Jonathan. Estou encantada com a tua explicação. Acho que tem tantas coisas que a gente estuda e muito nosso estudo tem muito a ver com a história dos judeus da Polônia até o período do Holocausto, né? E mais recentemente a gente acompanha algumas coisas que vão acontecendo, mas acho que você construiu aí um caminho de entendimento que eu acho precioso, né? Então, a gente vai abrir. Eu queria pedir, como a gente sempre tem feito aqui no Círculo, que as pessoas façam as suas perguntas, se quiserem fazer algum comentário, faça o seu comentário, mas que a gente lembre de dar espaço para os demais e das nossas possibilidades aqui de se escutar e de ouvir as experiências com toda a parceria que a gente tem sempre no grupo, né? Su, você faz a rodada?
Faço sim. Eu vi que o Samuel, a Norma e a Lúcia querem falar. Então, vamos juntar essas 3 perguntas e aí
Eu acho que só tinha uma pergunta já da Solange antes, que já estava no chat, acho que valia a pena incluir.
Certo.
Já estava escrita no chat.
Tá joia, é verdade. Tá legal. Então, vamos nos dividir aqui. Então, eu vou ler a pergunta da Solange primeiro, passo a palavra para o Samuel, a Norma, e aí a gente volta para o Jonathan e assim periodicamente, né? Então, a pergunta da Solange é uma pergunta pontual, ela pergunta se tem outros centros culturais relacionados à cultura judaica na Polônia hoje. Samuel, vamos lá.
Tá. Não, eu queria perguntar para o Jonathan, quantos judeus tem em Cracóvia? Se ele tem uma estimativa de quantos judeus tem em Cracóvia? Quantos judeus tem na Polônia? E se Cracóvia é o maior centro de judeus? Ou seja, quantos judeus tem em Varsóvia também? Essa aí, só isso. Obrigado.
Norma?
Okay, maybe I'll answer those 2 questions. So the first one, are there community centers, cultural centers? Ours is actually a community center, but obviously also a cultural center. But our name is Jewish Community Center. There is also one in Warsaw. We are the oldest. Ours was founded in 2008, and the one in Warsaw was founded in 2015. 14, 15. So there. In terms of how many Jews there are, well, I usually start my presentation with saying, hello, my name is Jonathan. You can ask me anything except how many Jews there are in Krakow or Poland. But I forgot to say it, so you got the question in, so I'll have to try to answer it. I'll tell you a story. I'll be very Jewish and I'll answer your question with a question. There's a young woman who found out that she was Jewish. She found out when she was 13. She had all these books in her house of Jewish books, books about culture, not Hebrew, but books about Jewish this, Jewish that. And she asked her mom, why do we have all those books? And the mother said to her, because your grandmother was Jewish. She didn't say you're Jewish. She didn't say I'm Jewish. She said your grandmother, her mother. So of course they're all Jewish, but anyway, this woman who found out she was Jewish has her mother who's Jewish, has a grandmother. The mother has a brother and sister, and the brother and sister have children. So according to strict Jewish law, in that family, there are 12 people who have a Jewish mother, so would be Jewish, 12. But this woman is the only one who is involved in Judaism, the only one who feels Jewish, the only one who says, I'm Jewish. So I ask you, how many Jews are in her family? Because I'm not comfortable saying 12. I'm not comfortable giving identity to somebody else who doesn't feel that identity. But I'm also not comfortable with saying one Jew, because those other 11 people have a Jewish mother. They're certainly not Jewish. So it's almost a category that we need, an extra category for these people that have some Jewish roots, but were cut off because of history. And now they haven't yet reconnected. Maybe tomorrow, some of her cousins will walk into the building and then they become Jewish. So I don't know. So I don't know how many Jews. I'll give you an answer in terms of how many I estimate, but I'm just telling you why it's so difficult, because people are still finding out, and sometimes the people that know haven't yet taken those steps into Judaism. But in my opinion, in Poland today, if you count how many have one Jewish grandparent, right? If you count one Jew, why do we say one Jewish grandparent? Because this is what you need if you want to become an Israeli citizen, right? You need one Jewish grandparent based on the Nuremberg laws, based on the laws that the Nazis used, right? So I think based on this number of one grandparent, you have 100,000 Jews today in Poland. How many Jews are active today in Poland? Maybe 10,000 or so. So the range is between 10,000 and 100,000. In Krakow, we probably have 1,000 active Jews, but that number could maybe be 3,000 or 4,000.
Jonathan, and in Warsaw, do you know how much? How many?
Warsaw is larger, but Warsaw is the largest Jewish community in Poland. Krakow is second.
Okay.
But Warsaw itself as a city is much larger. Krakow has 700,000 people, and Warsaw has 3.5 million people.
Okay. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Very clear. Thanks.
I like seeing all these names, these Polish names. Zilberstein. It's great. Everyone, so Polish. Kilstein.
Suzana, você que está mediando, certo?
Sim, certo.
Tá bom.
Eu vou chamar agora as próximas perguntas. A Norma, se quiser começar.
Sim. Olá, pessoal. Shabbat Shalom. Eu gostaria de saber se as instituições como o CCJ, elas sobrevivem com que apoio econômico. E eu soube, há uns anos atrás, a minha filha, que pesquisa a árvore genealógica da família, a Lea Grimberg, que hoje ela mora na Califórnia, ela, com 21 anos, foi até a Polônia para conhecer os Staples, que vieram o Zeide e a Baba. E quando esteve em Zaklikov, na verdade, Nagyelbodziec, que era a cidade do meu pai, sobrevivente a 6 campos, ela conheceu uma pessoa que fazia parte de um grupo de poloneses que estavam revitalizando ou redescobrindo o teatro judaico em Yiddish, e que eles tinham o apoio da Fundação Ivo. Então, realmente, a ação judaica da Ivo, de Nova York, está bastante presente nessa recuperação da cultura judaica na Polônia.
Terminou, Norma? Só para eu saber se eu achei. Obrigada. Eu vou chamar, então, a Lúcia agora para a gente juntar as perguntas, tá? para a gente otimizar o tempo.
Posso
Maybe
falar?
I just have a question that somebody asked about support. Do you mean financial support? The first question.
Sim, para que elas sobrevivam.
Where does the money come from? So our center is mostly supported by overseas donations, mostly from the United States. So our members pay a small fee to be a member, but we get about 95% of our budget comes from Jews in the United States. So I usually travel all the time to the United States to raise money, to beg for money.
Vou chamar agora a Lúcia.
Oi, primeiro, obrigada, muito interessante. Eu fiz uma pesquisa recentemente e eu não conhecia, no período comunista, entre 1946 e 1991, existia um jornal de Varsóvia oficial do Partido Comunista em Yiddish, eu acho que chamava Volksstimme, a voz do povo, e eu queria saber exatamente, então, quer dizer, devia ter público para esse jornal, e se existiam outros jornais em Yiddish no período do comunismo na Polônia. É isso, obrigada.
So during communism, again, I was speaking in very much in generalizations. So there was an organization that was allowed to continue during communism, a Jewish organization, but it was really seen as sort of collaborating with the communists. So people didn't like it very much. And it was seen as a tool of the government. So the government did allow certain things, but most people didn't want to participate in what was happening after 1968 until 1989. But there was, I think, nothing else besides that.
Vou chamar agora o Daniel Ávila.
Obrigado, Su. Obrigado, Jonathan. Eu fui a Cracóvia em 2016, tive a oportunidade de conhecer o JCC e foi durante o Festival de Cultura Judaica, foi bem incrível. Mas uma das coisas que me chamou a atenção na parte não judaica de Cracóvia foram nas lojas de souvenir, como que eles vendem uns bonecos de homens judeus ortodoxos segurando moedas e dinheiro, uma coisa muito esquisita. E a história que você contou desse judaísmo subterrâneo, como você descreveu, me lembra muito a história dos judeus de origem portuguesa aqui no Brasil, enfim, dos cripto-judeus, e como que hoje em dia também existe um movimento grande de conhecimento e recuperação de raízes judaicas de muitas famílias brasileiras, o que eu vejo que vem misturado com uma certa fetichização do judaísmo, que pode ter algumas características antissemitas, também tem alguma relação com o chamado judaísmo messiânico, né, esses movimentos cristãos. E eu queria saber se na Polônia também existem, nesse mesmo movimento de conhecimento e recuperação das raízes judaicas, se você também vê esses problemas de fetichização, antissemitismo e etc. Obrigado.
Well, first of all, thank you I'm happy that you visited and had a nice time in our JCC. We're always happy we welcome groups from all over the world, and I'm always excited to see when there are people who come from far away, like Brazil. So thank you for that. Yes, there are problems. I don't mean to say that everything is perfect and there's no anti-Semitism and we're all walking around hugging each other and stuff. Of course, there are issues. It's just generally it's a pretty safe, good place to be Jewish. You mentioned these figurines of Jews holding coins. Yes, these are stereotypes that are terrible stereotypes coming from a more politically correct place like the United States. It's unbelievable to me that this is done. But I think the way to, I've had this discussion with many people, and the idea is that the Jews were business people, the Jews were good with money, and these dolls with coins, Jews with coins, are supposed to bring you luck, bring you money, or bring your business luck. So if I say to somebody, and I've said it to somebody who with these coins, selling these coins, I say, excuse me, isn't that anti-Semitic? And they look at me like I'm crazy, because they say, what do you mean anti-Semitic? We're saying we're bad at something, you're good at something, and we want to have luck from you with this coin. What is anti about it? And I go, actually, you're making an interesting point. I think sometimes we need to separate offensive, something that can be offensive, with something that's anti-Semitic. So Poland, in many ways, Poland doesn't realize that there are Jews in Poland. In the United States, you have many sports teams named after the Indians, right? Baseball team, the Indians, college team, the Seminoles and the Apaches, and the NFL, the American football team in Washington, D.C., is called the Redskins, right? This is horrible. This is horrible. But the United States fetishizes Native American culture because the United States doesn't think that there are really Native Americans around. And I think this is a little bit about what's happening in Poland, that there's not an idea that Jews are around, so they just fetishize them. Is it anti-Semitic? It's complicated. I don't know. I don't love, if I show you my house, you don't see these coins in my house. Of course, it's something that I think is ridiculous, but I don't get too upset about it because I don't think that they mean something bad. I don't think there's bad intent. In terms of, the situation is generally a positive situation, though. There is what we call philo-Semitism. Do you know this term, philo-Semitism, right? There's anti and philo. Anti-Semitism is let's say, the irrational dislike of Jews. So philo-Semitism is the other side, right? The irrational liking of Jews. So sometimes people say, oh, isn't philo-Semitism just as bad as anti-Semitism? And my answer is no. I would rather have somebody running down the street, chasing after me, trying to kiss me, than running down the street, chasing after me, trying to kill me. So in the real world, maybe in the academic world, we can make an argument of both being the same. In the real world that I live in, I'll take philo-Semitism over anti-Semitism. But of course, Daniel, you asked, of course, the goal is for Jews to be seen as normal people, not as either good or bad. But we have to work on that.
Jonathan, agora eu tenho 3 perguntas escritas e eu vou ler para você e você me diz quando quiser responder, quando quiser que eu pare, tá? Então eu vou ler aqui. Ok. Só um momento. Bom, a primeira pergunta é do Ricardo. Ele gostaria de saber se os judeus participaram do movimento Solidariedade no início dos anos 80, mesmo que clandestinos. Essa é a primeira pergunta. A segunda pergunta é do Luiz Fernando. Ele gostaria de saber qual seria a relação entre a comunidade judaica e o governo eleito da Polônia. Ele pensa nessa pergunta considerando a relação do governo Bolsonaro, que é o nosso presidente atual, com alguns signos da história judaica, porque ele tá colocando o que o nosso presidente fica invocando em relação aos símbolos judaicos continuamente e a Israel, né, no Brasil. E a terceira pergunta é do Telmo. Ele escreveu em inglês, mas eu vou traduzir aqui. A Polônia pré-Shoah, tinha quase 100%, quase 100%, era quase 100% influenciada por judeus, por raízes judaicas, costumes, cultura, etc. Era quase um país judeu. Isso explica por que a Polônia não judaica afirma. This explains why the non-Jew Polish claim to have back their Jewish life. Isso explica porque os não-judeus, porque a Polônia não judia clama pelas próprias raízes judaicas. Acredito que seja essa a pergunta. Essas são as 3 perguntas, Jonathan.
So the first, Jews in solidarity. You know, we Jews always love a good revolution. So, of course, Jews were very active in solidarity. One of the most well-known participants in the solidarity movement was Adam Michnik, who went on to become the publisher of Poland's, and still is the publisher of Poland's main liberal newspaper. And yes, there were many Jews involved in solidarity, absolutely. Although there were certain also anti-Semitic elements of solidarity. Lech Wałęsa, who won the Nobel Prize, of course, for leading the solidarity movement, in the past said some things not very nice about the Jews, but also recently is much better and said some very positive things also. So it's a little complicated, but there were absolutely Jews very involved in the anti-communist opposition. The second is the relationship with the government. I would say that Jews, we have a good relationship with the government today in Poland, but we don't like the government today in Poland, which makes it complicated because they know we don't like them. So it's hard to have a good relationship with them, but we don't like them, not for things that have so much to do with issues relating to Jews. We don't like them because of the issues relating to democracy. The government doesn't like democracy very much, and we do. Jews in Poland, we like democracy, and the government doesn't. So we have an issue of this, and also this government, I say, is very, very anti-LGBT, very anti-women, very anti the media, free media. So we have issues with the government in that. In terms of anti-Semitism, in terms of Jewish issues, where we have an issue with the government is in terms of memory. Memory and Holocaust memory is something very close to the surface in Poland today. So you probably know about these laws that have been passed in Poland and then taken away again in Poland about dealing with the Holocaust. And this very much has to do with the fact the Polish government is very eager to talk about Poles, non-Jewish Poles, who saved Jews during the war, right? They're very eager to talk about that and how many Polish Poles are recognized in Yad Vashem, in the Holocaust memorial in Israel. So they're very eager to say Poles saved Jews. They're a little less comfortable, or a lot less comfortable, talking about the fact that many Poles during the war also, of course, hurt Jews and killed Jews and sold the Jews to the Germans and took advantage of the Jews, even after the war, pogroms by Poles. So I think that this government is engaged in revisionist history about the Holocaust, which causes problems for us as Jews. We don't say that Poles were all bad during the Holocaust, but we don't say that Poles were all good during the Holocaust. There were good Poles and bad Poles. And this is like any country in Europe. There were good French and bad French, and good Spanish and bad Spanish, everywhere. So this government, I think, is trying to feed something to the population that's easier for them to accept. telling the Polish people, no, 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 you don't need to apologize for everything. We were the victims only, we were the heroes. And it's hard for Polish people that were taught, especially during communism, that Poles were only two things. Poles were either heroes or Poles were victims. And it's hard for Poles to accept that they were also sometimes in a role of hurting others. So this is where we have issues with the Polish government, but the relations are okay. In terms of the third question, it was hard for me to understand exactly the point of the third question. Are Poles claiming Jewish culture as their own because it was so dominant in Poland? Was that sort of the question?
Yeah, he wrote in English.
So maybe I'll read it in the chat. I can read in English, maybe.
Sim, sim. Eu vou colar a pergunta. Perfeito.
I'm gonna look on
eu vou colar novamente.
I don't see the question in the chat.
Acabei de colar novamente, é a última agora.
Pre-Shoah Poland was nearly 100% influenced by Jewishness. It's almost a Jewish country. That explains why the non-Jews came to have back their Jewish life. I mean, yes, I think that's a positive. I don't know, you say 100%. Poland was 10% Jewish. The culture, the writers, the musicians, the middle class, the business was dominated by Jews. So there is a memory of the Jews in the country, and the Poles feel connected to that. You can go into any bakery. If you go into a bakery anywhere in Poland, they have challah, which they would call chalka, and they might not even know that it's Jewish bread, our challah bread, but they have it. So Judaism, Jewishness seeped in. It seeped into Poland over 1,000 years. But also Poland seeped into the Jewish people for 1,000 years. So you really can't separate Jewishness and Polishness in many cases.
Perfeito. Chamo agora o Décio Zilberstein.
Sim, primeiro eu queria agradecer o Jonathan e fazer menção ao fato que a Polônia tem uma larga tradição literária. Isaac Bashevis Singer recebe o Nobel, um polonês, e Cracóvia é uma das cidades literárias da Unesco, não é? Então, a minha pergunta tem a ver com a existência ou não, atualmente, de algum movimento estruturado de escritores judeus, talvez conectados ao Jewish Cultural Festival. Isso existe hoje visivelmente na Polônia?
There are Jewish writers, of course, in Poland, but only now we're starting to see, Jews really being visible in different states. But of course, Krakow itself is a city with a very proud literary tradition. We have, from here, we have Miłosz, who won. We had very Nobel Prize winners, a recent poet Adam Zagajewski, who just died, who wasn't Jewish but was very close to Jewish causes. So yes, you do have it. You do see Jewish writers, but the numbers are very small. Even the population of Jews is a small population. We're a country of 40 million, so it's still very small. But even if the writers aren't Jewish, very often the topics are Jewish.
O próximo é o Benjamin.
Eu fiquei instigado com essa ideia de um espaço comunitário que recebe grandes partes dos apoios de fora. Eu acho que é interessante, de uma certa maneira, é como se a comunidade com a qual ele trabalha é um horizonte, né? Ela precisa crescer ou ser fortalecida de uma certa forma. Porque hoje é um centro comunitário que tem uma comunidade, de uma certa maneira, fora da Polônia. Porque quem apoia, de uma certa maneira, faz parte dessa comunidade ampliada. Então, a pergunta é um pouco dupla. Por um lado, como a comunidade judaica polonesa ou não judaica polonesa ou híbrida tem apoiado, além do voluntariado. E, por outro lado, como se dá a relação com apoiadores de fora? Como que vocês envolvem essas pessoas de Nova York, de outra cidade, quem sabe depois de amanhã, de São Paulo? Como que vocês envolvem esses apoiadores nessa vida comunitária à distância? Eu acho interessante, como se fosse um JCC, um centro comunitário de uma comunidade diaspórica.
Yeah, this was a question spoken like the real head of an NGO. How do you raise money? Well, so I mean, first in terms of non-Jewish support besides the volunteers, yes, there is. In terms of financial support in Poland, a little bit. Poland is not a very rich country, so we don't really try to get too much money here in Poland. We don't get much government support, very, very little government support, maybe less than 1% from the government. Also from the European Union, we don't really get money, but we don't really try to get money from the European Union because it makes more, I'm hearing okay. It makes more sense for us to use the time and effort to raise money from Jews in the United States. Well, the key to what we're doing, how we do it, the answer is top secret. No, how we're doing it is that we have visitors. So it used to be that Jews from around the world come to Krakow. People come here because we're near Auschwitz, right? Many Jews will go on March of the Living, or they go with their synagogue, or they go with their JCC, with their federation. They will go and visit Krakow. So we have just changed the narrative, and we have said to them that it's impossible. You're not allowed. It's wrong to come to Poland and only see death. You have to, if you come here to us, to Krakow, you have to also see life. So by now, almost every group that comes to Krakow from all over the world, Jewish group, will also come to our JCC. They see what we're doing. We then capture their data, right? We stay in touch with them, and then they support us. On a technical level, we set up an organization in the United States called Friends of JCC Krakow, the way that Hebrew University or Tel Aviv University has Friends of Tel Aviv University in the so people in the United States can give them money. I travel around, as I said, around the world a lot to the United States, and I speak in synagogues and all around, and part of that means building a network and getting people involved and having people give us money. 75% of Jews in the United States have Polish roots. So it's a natural connection in terms of raising money, but it's difficult. We are in a unique position as an institution that's taking care of our local Jewish community in Europe, yet raising all the money abroad in the United States. But it's a lot of travel for the director.
A última pergunta, né, eu acho que talvez não dê tempo de encaixar mais nenhuma, a gente já está chegando ao final do encontro, é a da Lilian. Então, Li, por favor.
Eu lembrei que nós estamos às vésperas de relembrar o levante do Gueto de Varsóvia, e que aqui, inclusive, entre nós, na Casa do Povo, é um dos grandes símbolos de marco da memória, porque lembra a resistência, porque quando fala em Holocausto, lembra também quem lutou, e também, eu acho, porque se tornou um marco importante na própria ideia de resistência aqui no Brasil, onde, infelizmente, a gente, seguidamente, precisa se ocupar em cuidar de conseguir manter o país como um país democrático e as pessoas com com direito a ser quem elas são, se expressar e não sofrerem perseguição política, né? Eu queria perguntar se vocês sentem ainda essa presença, essa celebração e essa memória do levante do Gueto de Varsóvia como um evento importante, expressivo, como isso aparece na vivência de vocês aí.
Yes, the Warsaw Uprising is, you know, I look at the Holocaust personally as somebody living 19 years next to Auschwitz. The Holocaust, in many ways, and it's difficult to say, and it sounds ridiculous in the beginning, in many ways, the Holocaust was a victory. Why do I say the Holocaust was a victory? The goal of the Holocaust was to get rid of Jewish life in Europe, to get rid of the Jews. And it failed. It failed. All of these holidays that we celebrate, Purim and Hanukkah, and all of these are also victories. The same. The price that the Jewish people paid was very high, and the damage done to the Jewish people is unthinkable, unthinkable. But at the end of the day, the Nazis, the Third Reich is gone, and the Jewish people in Europe are still here. So I think the spirit of the uprising is very important for us as Jews all over. I think it's still an important event, not only for the Jews of Poland, for the non-Jews of Poland. There'll be a siren in Warsaw. The city hands out these little daffodils, which have become the symbol of the uprising. And absolutely, I think that we need to understand that the way we commemorate the Holocaust needs to not only be sadness and being upset about the loss. This is part of it, of course, but we have to also celebrate the idea that the goal of the Holocaust didn't happen and that we're still here. And that many of you, by your names, are coming from families that survived and also built the community in Brazil. So Holocaust commemoration is a little more complicated than we sometimes think it is. And I maybe just tell you one thing that we did. You know, you have Yom HaShoah, right? The day of Holocaust. And we also have International Day, January 27th, right? Which was the liberation, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. But we in Krakow have created a new day. And it's not only for us in Krakow, it's for the whole world. And the day is Holocaust Survivor Day. Not a day to focus on the loss and not a day to focus on the Nazis and what the world should have done and how the world was silent. All of that is true. And all of that is focused on other days. Holocaust Survivor Day, June 26th, is the day to honor and celebrate the Holocaust survivors and what we learned from them and what we continue to learn from them. I think the Holocaust survivors represent the best in who we are as a people. And this idea, if you think about it, the Jewish people has undergone tremendous difficulty for its whole history, for thousands of years. Yet we continue to move forward and we continue to be Jewish. And this is what the Holocaust survivors did, right? They went through the Holocaust and they didn't give up on life. They didn't give up on being Jewish and the Jewish people. And I think that they deserve a day of their own. So we created, and you can go, I'm putting the link here, HolocaustSurvivorDay.com, and you can get your community involved. We're looking for communities to celebrate, to the whole world, to celebrate Holocaust survivors in every community on that day. You can celebrate however you want. You can help them. You can have them do a ceremony for them. They can speak to students, whatever you want, but just a day to focus on the Holocaust survivors. I think that this is something that's been lacking in the Jewish calendar, and this is something that we've created an international day. Thank you.
Muito bem, estamos terminando. Terminando super pontualmente. Queria agradecer muito a presença e participação do Jonathan. Acho que aprendemos muitas coisas e muitos olhares para a gente poder enriquecer esse nosso pensamento sobre as nossas relações e as possibilidades da vida judaica, seja onde for, né? Queria lembrar, né, que a gente, como eu acabei de mencionar, estamos aí às vésperas da celebração do aniversário do Gueto de Varsóvia. O Benjamin está colocando aqui no chat vários links sobre uma prolongada programação que foi criada pela Casa do Povo para esse mês e para poder pensar sobre o levante do gueto nessas condições que a gente está vivendo e que, infelizmente, a gente não vai poder estar juntos na própria Casa do Povo, né? Suzana, quer retomar o aviso do começo para quem chegou depois? Pode ser?
Claro. É um aviso rápido, tá, gente? No próximo mês, quem se inscrever vai receber, quem se inscrever no Círculo, né, no Círculo de Maio, vai receber em casa a nova edição do Nossa Voz, que a Lilian está mostrando ali no vídeo dela, e junto com a nova edição da 451, né, a edição de maio da 451. Então, aquele mesmo formulário que vocês recebem mensalmente via e-mail, ele vai estar acessível também em outros lugares, em outras redes da Casa do Povo. A gente vai pedir os dados de vocês e vocês vão receber em casa. Tem um especial sobre literatura israelense na 451, tá? É isso.
Então, a gente vai ficando por aqui. Obrigada a todo mundo, obrigada aos tradutores que estiveram aí trabalhando com a gente. Ouvi um pouco da tradução, percebi que a experiência foi muito positiva. Realmente, o processo de entender aí a tua fala, acho que foi garantido para todos. Obrigada, Benjamin, aí pela parceria e pelo corre com ajudar também a cobrir com essa tradução. E é isso, a gente se encontra de novo em maio. Espero que vocês todos estejam aí com saúde, se cuidando. Isso, e alguém está colocando aqui, quem sabe a gente se encontra também em Cracóvia. Jonathan, com você, se você quiser se despedir.
Thank you. It was an honor speaking to you. The questions were wonderful. The translation, I assume, based on the questions, I can see that people understood what I was talking about. So I see the translation was fantastic. Please stay in touch with me. You can give out my email if anybody would like to stay in touch. And hopefully we will all see each other in person at some point. I've never been to Brazil, so I would love to.
Welcome to Brazil also.
Come visit, of course, and you're always welcome to come visit us in Krakow at the JCC. So thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Have a great day and be safe. Get vaccinated.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye bye.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shalom.
Tchau.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Eu falto agradecer ao Gabriel, que também nos ajudou muito nessa mediação do convite para o Jonathan. Deixo aqui os meus agradecimentos para o Gabriel Ornstein, fez boa parte dessa conversa.
E a Dorota Quinta, que nos ajuda sempre também.
Dorota, que também está aqui. Muito bem.
Eu vou
Muito
fechar
obrigada.
a gravação. Obrigado.
Lília, tem o e-mail dele, Lília?
A gente consegue sim, Samuel.
Tá, você me manda então. Obrigado.
Sim.